Let's look at the cell membrane. There are three main functions that the cell membrane carries out to maintain homeostasis. The first is to regulate what enters and leaves the cell, and we can say it's semi-permeable. Here we're talking about transport across the membrane. Only certain molecules can pass through. This is based on size. Small molecules can pass freely through the membrane, whereas larger ones need to be transported with a transport protein. The cell membrane also protects the contents of a cell. And when we're talking about protection, we're not saying that it doesn't let bad things in, because if a bad molecule is small enough, it can pass through the membrane into the cell. And the cell membrane receives messages from the environment to transmit inside the cell through the use of receptors. The structure of the cell membrane is thin and flexible. Okay? We can see that it is a bilayer. There are two layers to it. So if we take this diagram and we look at this section here, you see two layers, and this would surround the entire cell. It's made up of phospholipids, proteins, and cholesterol. We say that it is the fluid mosaic model. Fluid because it's flexible, and mosaic because it has all these other molecules that are embedded inside to make up the membrane. If we look at the specific structure of the phospholipids, which make up the lipid bilayer, each one has a fatty acid tail and a glycerol head. Looking at the heads, okay, this would be our breakdown of the molecular structure. If we look at our picture over here, all right, the phospholipid head is hydrophilic. Hydrophilic, all right, philia in Latin meaning to like or to love. It likes water. The glycerol head is a polar molecule. Remember that polar likes polar. If we look at the fatty acid chains that make up the tails on the bottom, we'll circle these down here. They are hydrophobic, okay? Phobic, meaning having a fear of. It doesn't like water. They're non-polar, so it stays away from the water and points inside. So we have these two layers. That's why it's called a phospholipid bilayer. Sometimes there's a lipid bilayer. And that makes up the entire membrane. Within that lipid bilayer, we have lots of other structures. We have proteins, which are going to work as receptors and for transport. If we look at some receptor proteins, that's these guys here we'll circle, called glycoproteins. And these are carbohydrate chains that hang off. But remember that receptors are going to be specific to molecules that they can receive. And that's based on the molecule shape. And then we can talk about transport proteins. And transport proteins have typically a channel that's embedded in the middle of them. They're like a tunnel. So we'll draw a channel in here for you. And the molecules that are too big to pass through this just lipid bilayer, such as glucose, will just travel right through this tunnel from outside the cell to inside the cell or vice versa. There's also cholesterol that's in the membrane. If we look, we see that we have these cholesterol chains represented by these yellow structures, and those help keep the phospholipids from sticking together and keeps the membrane flexible.